right, so hello Leo listeners, Cara here from leolistening.com, where I help adventurous expats and intrepid travellers improve their English listening skills so they can better connect with native speakers. That is such a mouthful, I have trouble remembering my own introduction. Anyway, so today I have a special guest with me. It's Julian Northbrook from Doing English, who has come on to talk with me about chunks. We'll explain what those are in just a second. I just want to highlight in the background, this movie poster is for the movie Chungking Express, which I think is
one of my favorite movies.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's actually, it's not my favorite movie, but my boyfriend had the poster and we needed to put it somewhere and we thought it would look good here. But I thought that was a nice link with chunks and Chunking Express, even though the movie has nothing to do with the linguistic concept of chunks. But anyway, we'll just ignore that for now.
Yeah.
So do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself, Julian, and what you do at Doing English?
That's a dangerous question, Clark, because you've potentially opened a Pandora's box of me digressing and rambling on for the next 2 hours. I'm Julian Northbrook, as you very rightly introduced me. Thank you for that. Hello, Clara, and hello to your listeners and fans. I guess I'm one of those odd people who seems to wear a lot of different hats, I think is the way that I always like to put it. I started off life as an artist, and that's what I wanted to do from the time that I was a kid. Incidentally, I've stayed in the building that film is filmed in, Chungking Mansions.
Oh, really?
In Hong Kong.
Oh, okay.
I went there on an art trip when I was a university student, like a lifetime ago now. I went from there to Tokyo, thinking that I was going to make my way into the art world of Japan. That went all horribly wrong very, very quickly, because I realized that without speaking the language, it was basically not going to happen. So at some point I sat down and said, right, well, I'm going to master this Japanese thing. And in the process of doing that, realized that actually I was more interested in linguistics and language teaching and learning than I was in art. So I kind of threw away that hat, as it were, put on a new one, and spent 13 years in the end teaching English in Japan. Eventually got a bit sick of that. I became a freelance translator for a while, got sick of that, ended up working in a company in Japan in Japanese. Very, very quickly got sick of that, and then thought, well, what am I going to do next? And that's where my business, Doing English, came from. And about 12 months ago, I moved over to Ireland, and that pretty much brings us to modern day. Is that a concise enough version of my journey?
Yeah, and I even had some time to sip on my coffee, so that's perfect. Okay, all right. Well, that raises lots of questions. Okay, so all right, interesting. So do you have an Irish passport then for Brexit?
Not yet. I'm British. It's actually. We came here thinking we're going to live here for 5 years, but with Brexit and all that mess, we're actually not sure what's going to happen now, because my wife's visa is looking pretty rocky with the no deal Brexit that they're looking at.
Is she Japanese?
Yeah, my wife is Japanese. I'm British.
Living in a third country.
Yeah, we fancied a change from Japan. Thought we were going to live here for 5 years. Probably will live here for 5 years. I mean, unless we get kicked out for some reason, which seems unlikely, but it could happen. You never know. I'm from the UK originally, though. Just no desire to go back.
Okay. Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Anyway, well, we'll try not to talk about about the B word, but yeah, if you're able to get
the B word,
if you're able to get a European passport from it, then.
Well, that's the thing. If I stay here for 5 years, I can apply for citizenship here if I want to. The UK allowing dual citizenship.
Okay, because not everybody. Yeah, I know people. I've got a friend in Spain who's struggling with this because Spain doesn't recognize.
Japan's the same.
Okay, well, these are migrant problems when you're moving between countries. You have to figure these things out. Okay, well that's a very interesting journey, I guess. And when you were a translator, what was your language pair?
Japanese to English.
Oh,
Now,
goodness.
I should qualify this. When I say I was a freelance translator, it was a short period of time.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I aspired to be and really wanted to do. And then when I started doing it, I just realized that, one, I hated working with the clients, and like the constant revisions and changes and going back and forth was just like, oh, it just drove me crazy. And I also realized that I actually really didn't enjoy taking something that other people had written. I was mainly doing stuff for kind of online travel blogs, was
Okay.
my main client. And I found that I really didn't enjoy taking things that other people had written and just rewriting that in a different language. I wanted to actually be changing the text and making it my own, which obviously is a big no-no in the world of translation. So
Yeah,
it was a short stint.
some translators say that you can and you should, like, if there are problems with the source text, you should suggest revisions to make the source text better. Well, like, obviously it's a bit delicate with clients, but yeah, that is one of the problems, is like a not very good source text. So you're having to translate something that's maybe not even
flawed in the first place.
Yeah. And it's like, my translation is going to look bad, but in fact it's not me.
Yeah.
The original text. Okay. And where are you from in the UK originally?
That's also a tricky question to answer because we moved around a lot. Devon mainly.
Okay.
I was born in Somerset, grew up in Devon, spent my college years in Plymouth, which is still Devon actually, and then my uni days in Gloucestershire.
Okay, well, I guess that's all concentrated for people who don't know UK geography. That is mostly concentrated in like the southwest.
Southwest, yeah, mainly southwest.
Yeah. Okay.
But I never picked up any one specific accent. I guess you would say I've got a southwest accent that's been smoothed over from years of living in Japan. But unlike my sister, who mainly kind of lived in one area, I never picked up any specific southwest accent.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, but I think if you've lived abroad for a long time, it change it. Yeah,
disappears, doesn't it?
Becomes more international or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think so. So it was. Did you say it was 13 years total that you lived in Japan?
Yeah, just no, actually it's kind of funny, and it wasn't planned like this at all, but it was 13 years to the day. I got there September 17th and I left on September 17th.
Wow.
It wasn't planned like that. It was just pure coincidence. Yeah, 13 years to the day.
Wow, that is quite spooky. Okay, because I've been in France for 12 years.
Right.
So yeah, although I'm not planning to leave, and certainly not on the day that I arrived. It's not really, in the plans. But anyway, okay, that's funny. I like talking to people who live abroad or who have lived abroad. Well, I guess in your case, you're still living abroad. Yeah, but a lot closer to home, but still in a.
And it's amazing how different Ireland is compared to the UK in terms of the culture but also the way people speak English as well. And on the topic of listening and learning to improve your comprehension in listening skills of a language, like I had to learn to understand what people are saying here in English. Like the South, I live in West Cork, and like the real gritty countryside accent that a lot of the older people have around here. Dear God, I'm like, my wife being Japanese, doing this as a second language, is like, I really can't get my head around this English thing. And I'm just like, you know what? English is my first language. And I don't know what they're talking about either. It's taken a year to really actually get a feel for the accent down here.
Because I've got a friend here who is from Dublin originally, but she's lived in France for like 30 plus years. And I've also known a couple of people here who were from Cork. So one guy I worked with, another girl I actually lived with for a while, and she was quite snobby about their accents. She was like, "Oh yeah, thing with their Cork accent."
Right.
She's got sort of a posher kind of Dublin accent. So I think there is a bit of like, Dublin is the city and Cork is the country. But I think Cork is actually quite a big city by Irish standards.
Right. There are differences between Cork and because we're in West Cork, because Cork is one of those awkward ones. It's do they call it a county here? I'm actually not sure. It's the county name, but it's also the city name. So the Cork city accent is easier to follow. It's very sing song. It's quite I quite like it actually. It's a bit more casual, said, than the more posher Dublin accent. I guess that's kind of like comparing like London to other dialects of English though. But the further west you go down into the countryside, kind of the grittier and like just harder it gets, I think.
To understand. Okay, I get it. Yeah, round here it's quite rural and there are some quite tricky accents of French, and it's things that you don't hear unless you live here, like, because you don't really hear that on TV or any, you'd have to actually come and talk to people because, it's not a trendy accent, unfortunately. So anyway, right. Well, this is all very interesting, but let's maybe get into, because you contacted me a few weeks ago, because we meant to do this sooner, but then I had big internet problems because my internet got completely cut off.
Yeah, no problem with that whatsoever. And in fact, we had a complete power cut yesterday, so I was actually quite worried that I was going to have to be the one that cancelled this time.
Right.
But luckily, it all came back on by this morning. So
good. No. Now, our internet has been working again for 2 weeks, but it's like when you have like 24 hours without it, it's quite stressful. We're so dependent on it.
It's like an arm cut off, isn't it?
A little bit. Metaphorically speaking, of course. So you, something that you didn't mention, but it's definitely worth mentioning, is that you're finishing off your PhD.
Yes,
right?
And this was really. I'm trying so hard not to digress now. I love to talk and just digress and ramble on about different things, and I could do it all day, Clara. But yes, I mean, that's the thing that I contacted you about, and the thing that I really specialize in is the topic of chunking. Also, incidentally, actually, I've just talked to my PhD supervisor yesterday, and I now have an official deadline for my thesis to finish the PhD, and it's exactly 1 month yesterday. So,
okay.
I'm in the as final stages as you can get. I did the research many years ago. What happened was I started a PhD. I went absolutely crazy with it for the first 2 years. I did all the research, did all the projects, and then I got sidetracked with other more exciting things. And the whole thing sat on a shelf collecting dust for the best part of 3.5 to 4 years. And I'm now at the point where it's like finish or quit. So because I'm out of time, so I'm now actually finishing the PhD. But what I picked as my topic was the topic of chunking. There are a lot of different names for chunking. I like the word chunk because it's just simple and it's descriptive. In the field of applied psycholinguistics, we tend to talk about it as formulaic language or formulaic sequences. But it's really a change in perspective compared to what I don't want to say. I don't want to say it's the old way of thinking about things, because there's still a lot of argument going on in the research. Academia tends to be like that, where you get two camps of people basically fighting it out forever. Each camp completely ignoring the other and pretending that their viewpoint is the only way to see things. I'm very much in the chunk-driven formulaic camp, which what that essentially means is the way that we used to think about language from around about the 1950s, thanks to the work of Noam Chomsky, who many people will have heard of. He's very famous as a linguist, one of the pioneers of psycholinguistics, and also now in the field of political critique, I guess would be the way to put it.
Political science,
Political science, he argued that syntax, grammar was everything, and that the human language system could be reduced down to essentially grammar, and that the most important thing was grammar, and words were kind of secondary, and the way that human beings use language was that we process these syntactical grammar rules in memory, and then we plug in words as we are going. But there were always problems with that viewpoint. First and foremost, the human memory, working memory, which is kind of like the brain's RAM, if you compare it to a computer, actually isn't that powerful at all. Like, we have this enormous resource that is long-term subconscious memory, but the ideas of the words and rules approach were always required us to be processing language with this RAM that we have. Well, we shouldn't be able to speak so rapidly, so fluently as we do using that resource, because it's just not enough.
Right. So if we were like plugging in grammar rules manually each time, it would take us
and if you
longer.
Yeah, it's a very, very clunky way of actually working. Not only this, but it also never explained how we actually use language. Because I could say to you something like, pleasant first half of the day to you, and you'd understand what I meant, and it's perfectly grammatical, but you're more likely to reply good morning, and that's what you will be expecting me to say. And also something like, for example, would you aid me in this task? Again, we understand it, but it sounds awkward. It sounds odd, even though it's grammatical. We expect people to say, could you help me with this? And then we also have things like thanks very much, which technically speaking is actually ungrammatical, yet any native speaker will see that as being a natural block of English. Well, what this really tells us is that we don't really process language in terms of words and rules combined at all. What native speakers are actually doing is storing huge numbers of these big prefabricated blocks of language in long-term memory. You can think of it as like the old kind of Technic Lego compared with the newer kind, where the old kind, you just had all these tiny little bits that you had to assemble. Whereas the Technic Lego that my kids now have actually really comes almost as like pre-built blocks. And it's just a case of just like plugging a lot of these in and then filling in the gaps. What this allows native speakers to do is use this hugely abundant resource that we have, which is long-term memory, and just pull these chunks out and use them as they are without having to process the grammar, without having to compute in our minds, determiner plus noun creates subject plus the verb in the progressive, and
I think that process will be familiar to people, though, if they've learned a foreign language, because they'll be like, oh, okay, so let me think, this word is this, and this is German, so that's my verb, so it has to go at the end, and it takes you half an hour to make your sentence.
Absolutely. And it's, I think it's probably the case in any kind of field, but the way that we actually approach the practical application of something is often very different to the best practices that we know from research academia. It's a sad fact that most academics tend to live in their ivory tower, if your listeners are familiar with that idiom, really just keeping their research to themselves and only talking among themselves. And one of the things that I really want to do with my business is actually take what I and others are doing in the world of academic research and actually translate that into something that is actually useful to the people who are supposed to be using these things. So the traditional approach still takes words and rules first, and then really words often as a secondary thing as its way of teaching. Well, the problem with this is it just creates bad habits. It trains people to think, well, all I need to do is practice more grammar, learn more words. But the problem is like, it doesn't matter how much you polish an inefficient way of processing language, you're always going to hit a ceiling, because what you are doing is something inefficient sped up is still inefficient. So when it comes to listening, for example, which I know is kind of the focus of what you're doing.
Yeah.
many of my clients will really struggle to understand people in conversation or watching films, TV, whatever it is they're doing. And part of the reason for that is it's almost like, and it's amazing in a sense that they're even able to do it as much as they can. But what they're almost trying to do is actually listen and pick apart the sentences as they go, analyzing it word by word by word. And with a certain amount of practice and a certain amount of proficiency, they've automatically started to chunk like some bits of this, so they're able to understand them quite quickly. But fundamentally, they're still focusing in on the grammatical details and trying to listen like that. Well, we know that the language processor just cannot keep up with that. So what this really means then is we need to be using a method which actually takes larger blocks of language as its primary focus. The Dutch, and if I'm just rambling, by the way, and you want to stop me, butt in and stop me, because I can just talk and talk and talk. I can keep this up for hours, days. One of the top names in the field of applied psycholinguistics, the Dutch researcher Kees de Bot, quite a few years ago now, proposed that we speak at a rate of 200, about one word, one unit of language every 200 to 400 milliseconds, which basically means we speak at a rate of about 3 blocks a second. But if you take a very, very common chunk in English, something like at the end of the day, and if your listeners are interested, there's an absolutely fantastic compilation of this. I will put it in the chat for you.
Thanks.
Somebody went through Jeremy Kyle, the Jeremy Kyle talk show.
Yeah.
Picking out all of the examples of the chunk at the end of the day, and it's just like this massive stream of people saying at the end of the day, at the end of the day, at the end of the day. It really just demonstrates how often we use some of these chunks.
And just to clarify that chunk, so it's not necessarily to do with like anything temporal, like at the beginning of the day versus the end of the day. It's a way to say basically. So I had a student comment on that recently. Like, I keep hearing people say basically all the time. Basically at the end of the day, like it's a way of summing up. What you're saying. But
ultimately, basically at the end of the day.
Yeah. But it's a kind of
its literal meaning as well.
It can get used. At the end of the day, we're going out for dinner or something. But but actually the most common use is But I've definitely noticed that in working on listening with people is that the same kind of chunks come up in conversation. So conversation is actually quite formulaic and routine.
Yes.
So there's that myth that once I know 10,000 words or 100,000 words or 1,000,000 words, then I'll be okay. But in fact, it's the words that you do know that are always going to pose the most problems, because obviously in the expression at the end of the day, you know all the words, and the meaning will become clear from context. You'll see that it's one of these kind of almost meaningless expressions, but
English is full of them, like these blocks of these chunks of language that actually have no meaning whatsoever, but we just pepper conversation with them. At the end of the day, it does have meaning, but
it's more for like marking kind of way. It's like for marking. Okay, I'm summing up now. But obviously, you don't say, and now here is my summary of this conversation.
Exactly. And that's, I think, that's a huge part of what I do with my clients, is training them to, first of all, like just really pointing out that it is a myth. Like just learning more words will not make you more fluent necessarily. Of course, I mean, all else being equal, more words is better. Quite few words in conversation. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but the researchers, Ehrman and Warren, I think they calculated that it's about 50 to 60% or somewhere around there don't quote me on that, because again, I don't have the numbers actually in front of me, of conversation is actually chunk driven. And depending on depending on your viewpoint, that's actually much, much higher than that. I think they were quite conservative in the way that they calculated it. But something like at the end of the day, I mean, first of all, it's that's 6 words long. So on the basis of what Keys de Bot proposed, that we speak in about 3 blocks a second, it should take us 2 full seconds to say at the end of the day, which clearly it doesn't. So if you, so if you are stuck in the, right, I'm going to pick apart the words and the rules, and that's how I'm going to comprehend what you're saying way of thinking, like clearly you're not going to be able to keep up. Well, if you block that down, suddenly it takes up a much, much shorter space of time. And I calculated exactly how long it does take native speakers to say this, just for fun, based on that Jeremy Kyle video, and it's about 500 milliseconds.
Wow.
So what that means is, if you think about it in terms of words, it will actually take 4 times as long to say and comprehend as it will if you think of it in terms of a single block. Not only this, and this is now getting into something that you mentioned a moment ago about I think you mentioned this, I can't remember if this is something you said before we started recording or not, so forgive me if it was, about the speed at which we speak.
Oh yes,
many people think that many people think that native speakers are speaking very, very, very fast. That isn't necessarily the case when you actually break it down and look at the chunks of language instead of the individual words, because something like at the end of the day actually isn't said as at the end of the day. It's actually a single smooth unit. We actually say the end of the day, at the end of the day. And it's like the sounds are all crushed down, blended together, and you get this single smooth block. And that's a huge part of what people see as being very, very fast speech, because they've learned by studying individual words with grammar rules, and then they've probably also spent most of their time with these textbooks that have these CDs created by professional voice actors who are very carefully and very slowly enunciating each and every word in a way that's very easy to follow and easy to understand. And then you get a native speaker who's just like, oh man, at the end of the day, it's just rubbish, innit? And your head just goes like, what is he saying? And it's because we're listening for those individual words that it sounds so just like a machine gun going off. But if you chunk that down and look at it as fewer blocks, at the end of the day, it's rubbish, innit? Like we see, it's actually only 3 blocks of language. And I can't remember exactly what I said a moment ago, so hopefully I got that wrong. People are going to be rewinding the recording now and saying, wait a minute, what he said a moment ago was different. But am I making sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense from what I've seen. What I've seen, I don't know, from learning languages. From I also studied linguistics at university. So I guess it's a long time ago now, but so the concept is familiar for me, maybe a little bit unfamiliar for people watching, but it totally makes sense as well from what I've seen from working on listening, is that these kinds of frequent chunks are the ones that pose problems. But then I also think that this is the advantage of listening to native content, is that then you can have this uptake of the chunks that you use in your own speech. And I know there's a lot of anxiety around, like, I want to speak fast like a native speaker. Don't think you have to do that, but I think if you function in terms of sort of chunks, then and piecing them together, then you will be able to, because nobody pronounces at the end of the day carefully,
right?
Because it's not the point in conversation. Also, I think what I've noticed as well is like native speakers are expecting to hear these chunks, so even before someone says it, they probably know that it's coming at that point in the conversation. So yeah, they're not decoding it piece by piece, and they're not surprised to hear it. And they know one thing that's interesting is all the different variations, because like there's probably like the fastest version of at the end of the day, and then kind of like different speeds almost. Like they all sound fast, but it can get even more fast and unclear, depending
on emphasis and different things. If you look at the Jeremy Kyle video, you'll see that there is at the same time, this is going to sound like it's contradicting itself. At the same time, there is incredible consistency, but also incredible variation with the way that people say it.
Yeah.
Because some people do slow down, and they will say it's like, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then somebody else is just, it's going to be more like a meaningless thing that they've inserted in there, almost like an or an where they're just like, at the end of the day, and it's almost like a filler to allow them time to think. Use them in the same kind of way.
Well, even the person who slows down on day, that is a way of thinking before you go to the next chunk.
Right. And I guess that can be likened to, I mean, we do that with individual words as well. So, well, I've just done it now, not really meaning to. I've said so, and I'm trying to think, and I'm like, yeah, that might be the case. Where we're extending the word to allow time to think. Well, we do the same thing with blocks of chunks as well.
Okay, interesting. Well, actually, I'm just thinking about, so you're talking about that Jeremy Kyle video. When we were in the UK, we really liked to watch the program Homes Under the Hammer. Have you ever seen it?
You know what? I haven't, but I can guess from the title what it's going to be about.
What it's about? So it's like daytime TV. It's on like weekday mornings on the BBC, and it's a program about people who buy houses or apartments, property at auction. And so usually it's people who are investing in the property to resell it or to rent it out. So they usually buy property in quite a bad state that they then, renovate, and it's for a property business or something like this. And so the presenters on the show, they go and visit the properties before they get auctioned, and they kind of show you around. And it's kind of funny because this is what I like about, TV series or TV programs that always have the same format, is that you're always hearing the same chunks and the same, you kind of know what's going to happen because it's always the same thing.
Right.
And somebody has made a compilation of, so one of the guys who presents it is actually Dion Dublin, who used to be a football player and is now presenting TV property programs. Why not? And my brother told me about this, someone has made a video of him saying, "Through to the lounge," because he says that in every single episode, like, "Through to the lounge." Like, he comes in the entrance and then he's like, "Through to the lounge, upstairs to the bedrooms, upstairs to the bedrooms." And it's kind of like, it's almost pointless to say that, because obviously in a 2-level house, usually, yes, the bedrooms are upstairs. Like, it's not surprising. And generally when you come into a hallway and you go through, yes, there is the lounge or the living room. And so someone's like put all those chunks together in a compilation just because it's kind of a pointless thing to say. So it just that Jeremy Kyle example made me think of that. Upstairs to the bedrooms. Okay.
Brilliant. And I haven't seen that one, but I've just made a note of this.
You should have a look. It's probably funnier if you know the show. But I actually need to look at it myself. So that made me think of that. Right. So in terms of, what should we do then? So now we know about this concept of chunks or chunking. What should we do then? What does that mean for learning English, improving listening, improving,
Okay, so I mean, first and foremost, and this is really what I kind of push my clients towards. First and foremost, it's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily need to be a huge change in the way that people do things. Really, it's a change in perspective.
Okay.
So when it comes to studying the language or listening or watching TV, instead of like trying to catch words that you don't know, just pay attention to the larger blocks of language. Pay attention to that and try to see language instead of words and rules, try to see it as chunks. And once you kind of get into that way of thinking about things and doing things, like, you start to notice more. And are you familiar with the law of attraction?
Yes, I've heard of it.
It can be a little bit kind of airy fairy woo woo, very new age, the way that many people talk about the law of attraction, like the universe is bestowing something upon us that we want. But actually, what the law of attraction really is the law of attention. And what it simply really means is that because we have something at the forefront of our mind, because we are thinking of something already, we start to spot it, we start to notice it. I remember several years ago when I wanted to buy a new bicycle in Tokyo. I had no interest in bikes whatsoever until that point. And I hadn't paid attention to the bike shops in my areas, people riding bikes. It just was not on my radar at all. But the second I thought, I want a new bike, all I could see was bikes, bike shops. There's a bike shop here, there's a bike shop there. Look, there are people riding bikes. Ooh, there's a bike park there, which looks really cool. And it's because it was on my radar. It's just something that I was thinking about. Like, you just start to spot all of these bikes everywhere. And it's the same with language as well. When you start to think, okay, well, native speakers primarily speak in these blocks of language, these chunks of language that are stored in long-term memory, we then start to hear them all over the place, and we start to spot them, and we start to make better use of the learning opportunities that are presented to us in our studying and in our daily listening as well, simply because, again, they are all over the place. Like, a huge percentage of language is chunked. As soon as we become aware of that, we start to notice them. And really, this is the big change, I think. I do have a couple of exercises that I use with my clients and with my students to just help kind of speed the process up. And if we've got time, I can share one of those with you.
That would be great.
Originally, when I contacted you and I was planning this, I was actually going to talk about dictation, because that's something that I use a lot in my methodology. But then I watched for a couple more of your videos on YouTube, and I see that you've talked about dictation and the benefits of that quite a lot already, haven't you?
Yeah, I have, and I can see how it's really connected to chunks. So if you've got something else, that would be great. Instead
of me reinventing the wheel, to use one particular chunk that I really like, nice I thought I'd share something that I did a lot when I was kind of learning Japanese back in the day, and something that I've more recently, I guess, remembered in a way, and started talking about with my students. And this is not so much an exercise for better chunking skills. It's really more of just a listening exercise in general, but chunking is related. Just to tell you where this came from. A couple of months ago, with my clients and my group coaching courses, we have a live Q&A session, like a live group coaching session each week, where people basically just ask me whatever questions they want to ask. And several weeks ago, one of my clients said that he was really struggling to understand kind of the speed of English. Like, he was listening to the things that he was using to learn from as his study materials just seemed to be too fast. And he said to me, is it okay to slow them down? And my answer to that was, well, no, unless you've got like a magic remote control, like what's the name of that film? Click, with Adam Sandler. Have you seen that? It's a terrible comedy film. My wife loves it. Like, God gives him like this remote control that he can use to speed people up, pause them, slow them down. Well, if you've got one of those and you can slow people down in conversation, then yes, slowing down the audio that you practice from will be beneficial. But the problem is if you slow the audio down, that's going to make people in real life just feel much, much faster than they actually are. So what we should actually do is the opposite. This is an idea that I originally got from Tim Ferriss. And for people who aren't familiar with Tim Ferriss, I mean, what does he call himself? He's a life hacker, I think is the way that he calls himself. Yeah, something like that. And I think it was about 10 years ago. He had kind of a documentary series that he was working on called Trial by Fire. And there was one particular episode where he went to Japan to learn the ancient art of yabusame, which is basically horseback archery, and it's like a very, very fast-paced form of archery. They go flying down this track on a horse at high speed, shooting targets with a bow and arrow as they go. Is kind of the idea. And this sport is supposed to take a lifetime to master, and he said, right, I'm gonna learn to do this in a weekend, in a very, very short space of time. And don't quote me on the exact number of days there, because it's been a while since I've watched it. And as a part of that, he's talking about how the part that he was really struggling with was actually reloading the arrows onto the bow fast enough, because he's on this horse flying down this track at high speed. He's got all these targets he's got to hit, but he can't hit the target if he can't get the arrow out of the quiver into the bow, draw and fire fast enough. And he said he calculated it, and he has to be able to reload every 9.8 seconds in order to even stand a chance at shooting at each target. So what he did is he talked about something from computer science called hyperclocking. And essentially what hyperclocking means is where you change the settings on a computer so that it runs much faster than the manufacturer intended it to run. And Tim Ferriss talks about this in terms of the human nervous system. And he says, well, in my case, the computer is actually my nervous system and my ability to move fast enough. So in the case of listening to English, it's going to be the language processor is kind of what we're talking about here. So what he did is he practiced the reloading of these arrows much, much faster than he would actually have to do in real life. I think he said it was 7 seconds. He practiced doing it one every second, 7 seconds.
Right.
So that when he was then on the horse, it's almost like things slowed down, because he's got so used to doing it at a certain speed that now he has more time to do it. It's like the world around him slows down, and he's then able to do that in a much more relaxed, easy kind of way. So I thought, well, that sounds really, really good. What if I apply that to my own Japanese listening? And I thought, well, I've got these, like I'm listening to these audio things like YouTube videos or segments of films or the materials that I was using, and they sound really, really fast to me. Well, what if I listen to them at 1.5 speed, double speed? And I found it really helpful. What essentially I was doing, and what I'm now teaching kind of my clients to do, is you get the audio that you're listening to, you rack the speed up to about 1.5 double speed, depending on what you can manage.
You can handle, yeah.
What you can handle. And then you've got to then sit there and you've got to really, really concentrate on it. And you might have to listen through a few times. But if you've got, a 10-minute audio and you're listening to it at double speed, well, you're going to get through it in 5 minutes. So you're going to want to sit there and listen to this 3 or 4 times. And you're really just trying to force yourself to understand the overall meaning, get the gist of what's going on. And this is also going to force you to see language in terms of bigger blocks of English as well, because at double speed, you're never going to be able to focus on individual words. But if you start looking at the end of the day, instead of at the end of the day, well, you're better able to catch those. Once you then get to the point where you're able to understand fairly well at double speed, you then turn that down to normal speed and listen again. And it's like, wow. And it's almost painful to listen to. You almost start to get irritated because it's so slow. Just thinking, wow, like, was this really difficult? Like, how
Yeah.
did I find this fast in the beginning? And it's this intensive process of learning to understand it at double speed that then makes it appear to really slow down.
Mm.
I have the Tim Ferriss video here in my notes
Oh, okay. Yeah,
if
we
you
can
would like to
pop that under
watch it
the.
yourself.
All right. Yeah, that sounds interesting.
So I've recently I've recently shared that with my clients, and I've recently been getting some of my clients to do it as well. And they've reported kind of the same results as what I had in Japanese. And I did this for ages and I got really into it. It's just a way of just making natural conversation just sound easier, slower by speeding it up, practicing it double speed. We then make real life very comfortable and very easy in comparison, as opposed to what most people try to do, which is slow it down, which then actually has the opposite effect of just making everything seem much harder in comparison. Have I explained that well enough?
Yeah, no, that's really, really clear. That analogy is really good, and I have my own, I guess, because and I was going to write about this when I did my driving test in France, and before at the driving school I went to, before they would actually let you in a car and on the road, you had to start coming to the school to start learning the highway code. So they had like a sort of, it was a thing on a computer, and you had a little, I don't know, multiple choice thing, and you had to pick the best answer. And it took me ages to get good at that. Like, I used to get really awful scores, and I just kept going and going with it until I kind of got better, obviously, seeing more questions, seeing more of the rules. And then when I actually went to the actual test, the highway code test, I found that it was much easier than the practice version. So in fact, the practice one at the school, it was like the really obscure rules of the road. And then when I went to the real test, I was like, oh, this is easy. And I passed it easily because we had actually been doing something harder. And I know my dad said that this happened to him at school. Their maths teacher gave them harder material than they would have in the test.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and it sounds counterintuitive. It's like, well, why wouldn't you start like with something easier and gradually build up? But the point is to sort of, you prepare yourself by actually doing something that's harder than the real situation. And that's what I also like about using movies and TV shows, because they are very challenging and often more challenging than real life.
Right.
And if you can manage that, then obviously the
conversation becomes easy in comparison.
Yeah, but it's so counterintuitive, because you would think, well, why, what's the point in sort of struggling more? But I really like how speeding it up gives you that change in perception, because you really can't go word by word. So I think that's very clever, and it's not something I've necessarily thought of doing. I do slow down audio, but it's so I can analyze it for people.
Right.
To explain, okay, so this sound disappeared. There was because there's some things I don't even perceive, because obviously this is the problem for us as native speakers, is we're so used to it, we don't actually realize what's happening. We go, oh yes, they said at the end of the day. Like teachers do this, they repeat things back to students that were actually really fast, really blurry, really messy, in a really careful way, because
that's a different type of activity, though, isn't it? With a very different focus. And I do think there is room for very close, very careful, analytical study. I just try to keep a distinction between, right now what I'm doing is I'm slowing the audio down because I want to properly analyze it and look at where the sounds drop out because of the way that we chunk language, compared with I want to improve my listening skills so that I understand people in native conversation. Different kind of activity with a very different focus. And I think if you mix those focus up, if you mix that focus up too much, then you end up with very unreal perceptions of what it's actually going to be like in the real world. I mean, I also would slow things down to analyze, but again, the focus there is different, I think.
Definitely. Okay, all right, so speeding up audio, and that's very easy to do, of course. Like on YouTube, you have on most video platforms, there is a little speed up, and you can do it with podcasts as well. Most podcast apps have that option. So Yeah, double speed, or even like some of them are quite fine grained, like 1.25, 1.5. You can kind of,
and also the side benefit of that as well is that when you get used to listening to stuff at double speed, like I listen to I run a lot, so I'm out running for pretty much an hour every single day, and I'm listening to audiobooks and seminars and whatever it might be whilst I'm out running. That's kind of my learning time in a sense, because I can't focus on things like that when I'm at home. There are too many distractions. But out running, it's just me, the cow shit splattered roads here in West Cork, and my whatever I've got in my ears. Well, once you get used to listening to something at double speed, you get through an audiobook in half the time. And if you're just listening to it for the information, well, that's a lot of time saved at the end of the day.
I love it. My hack for that is to listen to authors speak on podcasts about their books, and then you don't even have to read the book, or just read the Wikipedia summary. But
because you basically get when they go on the podcast, they give you all the good stuff anyway.
All the good stuff, yeah. But anyway, and if you listen to that podcast on double speed, no, let's not go crazy. But yeah. Okay, well that's really interesting. But I realized that what I've been doing with dictation, it is chunking in a sense, because one of the things I've been focusing on recently is questions, and I think if you start to see questions as chunks, then because questions are so hard to form in English, and apparently that's one of the things in Japanese that is easy, is to make a statement into a question.
You just add ka onto the end. I guess ka in Japanese, and it's similar in Chinese as well, ma, is like the rising intonation that we have in English.
Okay, because you can do that in French. You can just take a statement and add rising intonation. You obviously have to do it right, because occasionally my boyfriend will say to me, is that a statement or a question? Like, are you asking me a question, or are you just like stating something? But
it does do that as well, but it's not the primary way of making a question.
No, true. And I think people get really bogged down with the auxiliary verb, word order, and actually if you sort of look at frequent questions as chunks, then piecing together the word order becomes less of an issue, because you just start memorizing these frequent questions, like what do you think, what you up to, where you go, and those are all high frequency chunks of language that a native speaker would not think of in terms of words and rules. It would just be straight out of long-term memory. It's just like you're just knocking them off as single blocks. So, exactly.
Absolutely.
And that's also why native speakers who don't have a teaching background or a linguistics background or a language learning background cannot explain these things to you, because they don't actually consciously know. Obviously they look puzzled if you start asking a native speaker about the present perfect or something, they won't have a clue what,
Honestly, I've been doing this for 14 years now, coming up to 15.
Wow.
14 years now. And I still get confused with what's the grammar behind this? And I'm looking at it and I'm just thinking, you know what? Honestly, I'm actually not too sure. Let's look that up together. And when I talk to a lot of my clients, I'm often very, very impressed, but also slightly baffled by the level of syntactical, grammatical knowledge that they have.
It's amazing.
Many of my students could rival a professional linguist in terms of actually analyzing the structure of language, because that's what they've been trained to do. And if you're going to be a professional linguist sitting down and analyzing the syntax of language, it's a brilliant skill to have. But if you're going to just be chatting with people in conversation, or you're going to be attending a sales negotiation in an English meeting, then it's not that helpful.
It's actually a handicap, because it's going to stop you from expressing yourself. It's ironic that people learning the language often have a really excellent kind of meta knowledge of fancy way of saying, of this has a higher level grammatical knowledge that many native speakers just don't possess and will get very confused about. But it's
fascinating stuff, and I'm a real geek, so I love it. But it's it's not that useful.
Yeah, it's not on the day-to-day practical things. Yeah, not so much. Okay, so chunks are the way to go.
Other way to go. Again, as I said right in the beginning, I mean, the slight qualifier there is that, yes, in academia, there are different camps with very, very different opinions about how things work. And yes, academics are constantly fighting between themselves. I'm very much in the what we would call the usage-based camp of second language acquisition, which essentially means that we learn primarily through usage of the language and studying how language is actually used, rather than studying grammar rules and words. So my viewpoint is biased somewhat, but I mean, I've been doing this for years with my clients, and the results are incredible and have always been much, much better than anything I ever saw when I was teaching in ESL schools and given textbooks based on a grammar-based syllabus. And we're like, okay, well, today we're going to cover the present perfect again, because I mean, you haven't done that enough over the last 10 years.
You still don't understand it. Yeah. Okay. No, I think a lot of people can relate. So yeah, no, I'm gonna that's the next time I have to do present perfect, I'm just gonna ask, have you ever questions with people, just over and over again, and not worry about, going too much into the rules, just kind of hammer it into their brains. Okay, all right, great stuff. So where can we find you then on the internet? And
I like to spam the internet with my face and my videos, so almost anywhere. But the best place to go is doingenglish.com. That's kind of my main website at the moment. There's not much on there apart from really just a place to sign up for my daily emails. I send daily email tips. And then that's also got a link to my blog where you can find my not daily but fairly regular YouTube videos. You can find them embedded on there. Or you can search for Julian Northbrook on YouTube and you will find me, because to my knowledge, I am the only Julian Northbrook in the whole world. I've never been able to find another.
All right. If you are the other Julian Northbrook, please make yourself known.
Or don't, because if you do, I won't be able to say that anymore.
Oh no. All right, Julian, well, thanks very much. And I guess if people have any questions, I guess they can find you in various places and come and say hello and ask. Okay, thanks very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Clara.